America's longest war is drawing down. After nearly 20 years, the U.S. is almost completely pulled out of Afghanistan. On Thursday, President Biden announced the remaining troops would be removed by August 31st. He said the responsibility would now fall on Afghans.
In 2011, the NATO allies and partners agreed that we would end our combat mission in 2014. In 2014, some argued one more year. So we kept fighting. We kept taking casualties. In 2015, the same, and on and on. Nearly 20 years of experience has shown us that the current security situation only confirms that just one more year of fighting in Afghanistan is not a solution, but a recipe for being there indefinitely. It's up to the Afghans to make the decision about the future of their country.
The swift drawdown is being met with global skepticism as the Taliban assumes control over an increasing amount of territory. Earlier, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the U.S. had accomplished its goals, but admitted it's not a time to celebrate.
We did what we wanted to do, which was we got the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. We delivered justice to Osama bin Laden. We degraded al-Qaeda's capacity to the point they did not present an active threat to our homeland. He made the decision after a clear-eyed assessment, in part because he's never seen there to be a military end to this war, and also because as we came into office, we had an agreed-to timeline. After May 1st, the uptick in violence was coming this summer. The status quo was not sustainable.
Meanwhile, the Delta variant is now the dominant strain of COVID-19 in the U.S. A new study highlights the importance of being fully vaccinated. The research was published in the journal Nature. It found that just one dose of Pfizer or AstraZeneca's vaccine, quote, barely protects against the variant. That's due to mutations allowing the strain to get past immune defense systems. In 95% of fully vaccinated people, that variant was neutralized. And in Washington, Vice President Kamala Harris said Democrats are investing to protect voting rights. She announced a $25 million pledge by the National Democratic Committee in a speech at Howard University Thursday. The move comes after Republicans blocked the party's For the People Act. The bill sought to preserve voting rights on the federal level. So far this year, 17 mostly Republican states enacted new laws restricting voter access. For more, let's bring in Ed O'Keefe, Anita Kumar, and Rhonda Colvin. Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent. Anita is White House correspondent and associate editor at Politico. And Rhonda is Capitol Hill reporter for The Washington Post. Thank you all for being here on this Thursday, busy news day. Anita, I want to start with Afghanistan because we have been watching the Taliban take over areas almost as soon as American forces are leaving them. So what exactly is this administration making in terms of commitments to the Afghan government?
Well, thank you for having me. You heard the president kind of defensive today talking about his plans. Of course, we knew this was coming. We didn't know the exact date. What he's talking about now is less security and more economic and humanitarian aid. He said, obviously, the Pentagon will continue to watch the situation there as well. One thing that we know that's coming immediately is that the United States is working with other countries to try to get some Afghan people that have helped the United States there out of those countries and into other countries where they can wait as they are looking for visas to come to the United States. So President Biden has pledged that he will work with Congress to make those visas available to the Afghani people, but in a quicker way than is normally allowed. And that's really what he's looking at doing at the moment. Where, he had a lot of questions. He's had a lot of questions posed to him about what's going to happen, as you indicated, if the Taliban continue to make headway in different parts of the country. And he and his press secretary, Jen Psaki, said, well, these are hypotheticals. We already knew it was going to get better or get worse, and we'll see what happens. So mostly they are looking at this humanitarian and economic aid.
And Ed, as you know, this is an issue with which Joe Biden is very, very familiar because in 2001, he was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And back then, he said that the U.S. needed to make a long-term commitment to ensure Afghanistan's security from the Taliban. So how does that square with what he's saying at this point?
I actually think it squares pretty closely, because if you listen to what he said today in terms of, is the mission been accomplished, or did we go and achieve what we wanted to achieve, he'd argue that we did, in that Osama bin Laden was captured and killed, and al-Qaeda was essentially eradicated in the country and neutered in its attempts to cause global terrorist attacks using Afghanistan as its home base. Then he makes the argument that, in his view, and in the view of military commanders, the Afghan military is in far better shape. It's just that the Afghan government's got to get its act together and figure out how to work together to combat Taliban forces that are, if anything, is going to lead to a civil war or perhaps the country toppling. So I think this is, for him, very frustrating, because he knows that, we talk about it in this kind of a setting. He gets asked these sort of simple questions, what about this, what about that? And it was evident to me, watching it today, that he has given all of this great thought, and has had to give it great thought a lot over the last 20 years, given that he was, as you said, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and then sat there and, we know, played devil's advocate throughout the 8 years of the Obama presidency. Former President Obama writes in his memoirs that it was often Biden who sat there and sort of made the counter-argument to military leaders and saying, well, why should we do this? Or what about this? Or what about that? When everybody else in the room was heading towards continuing or expanding military operations in the country. And I think also we should point out, as our David Martin reported earlier today, Pentagon officials are, while they may not have agreed initially with the president's decision, they're at peace with it, because in their view at least, he's listened to them and he's talked about this with them at least 6 times over the last several months. And, they're all now in a position where the drawdown is happening. But this is pretty consistent with his views on how U.S. military operations should be conducted around the world. If there's no longer, or if there isn't, an immediate national security threat, then U.S. military forces shouldn't be engaged. And we heard him say it repeatedly today, that in his view, and frankly, if you look at polling and the views of most Americans, there's no longer a threat that justifies keeping the military there the way it's been there.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. And as you were talking, we were playing photos of Biden in Afghanistan over the years. So just a reminder of how long he has been working on this issue. Anita, another big issue on the agenda today, of course, was voting rights, with Kamala Harris speaking about it. The administration claims that they're trying to elevate this issue, but they've really not been able to do a whole lot in terms of stopping a lot of these restrictions that have been passed at the state level. So tell us a little bit more about this messaging. Is it about really getting legislation passed, or is it, simply about presenting a message maybe for the midterm elections?
Yeah, I think these are really two different things that are going on. What they're talking about doing, that the vice president talked about today, is really an effort to get more people to vote, to get them registered to vote, to explain the voting process and that sort of thing. It is messaging. It's also registering people to vote. That's something she's talked about before. She's talked with the DNC about that earlier. The other issue, of course, is this legislation, as you indicated earlier, that 17 states have passed and other states are looking at doing. And, of course, this federal legislation that's not going anywhere in Congress. So there are two different things right now. And you have some frustration from activists who say, look, well, while registering people is very important, we do want this before the midterms and before the presidential election. What they need help with is stopping these this legislation in the states, and also getting this legislation at the federal level passed with other protections. And it's not been the top priority for the administration. Obviously, we know where the president has stood. He's been working on COVID. He's been working on infrastructure and his other spending plans. And there's a sense from some of these activists that if the president had put all his political capital on voting rights, that perhaps he could work with Congress and get something through. And so they're saying, let's do that now. And it just hasn't happened. So I think there are two tracks on this, and we haven't seen much on that second one, which is what activists would really like him to work on.
Yeah, and interesting in the context, too, of Texas having a special session that starts today to revive that voting bill that they had. Rhonda, we cannot let a day go by without talking about infrastructure. So I want to turn to you about, what sort of deadline are we looking at this point for getting a bipartisan deal through the Senate floor? And tell us a little bit more about this reconciliation bill that Democrats are eyeing.
Right. Well, we know from Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, he has said that he wants to start bringing this bill, the infrastructure package, to the Senate floor the week of July 19th. So the Senate is now out on their July 4th break, and he says when they come back, they want to start bringing this to the floor. Now, the reality of it is this bill appears to be fairly fragile still. You have Senator Sanders, who has said he won't vote for it unless there is a reconciliation bill attached to it. He's concerned that some of the initiatives that he cares a lot about, like climate change, energy efficiency, those things are not in the bill right now, and he wants to see them in there and says that he won't vote for anything less. So right now, Democrats, obviously, because of the power structure in the Senate, need every single vote. So it shows you that negotiations are still being had in what the final infrastructure package looks like. And that's a signal to the White House, even though we have heard from them that they have come up with this bipartisan deal, that they're ready to move forward. There is still some selling to do among their own, apparently. So I guess we'll wait and see what happens when senators return to D.C. and what moves they make next on this. But it is something that Democrats say they want to get to the floor in the latter part of July.
Yeah, that's a really important point. As much as we're talking about trying to get Republicans on board, this is an administration that really has to keep its entire Democratic caucus intact, really, given the breakdown. And so I kind of want to ask you a little bit more about those dynamics. You mentioned Bernie Sanders. There's also Joe Manchin. Kind of shows how far apart these two sides are. Is there any indication of how close they might be on something like this?
I don't think we have any indication right now. I have been seeing that there are conversations being had while they're on this July 4th break, but we haven't heard anything public and where everyone stands. So again, there's going to be a lot of talking when they return to D.C. I think this is really issue one because Democrats really want to get this through before that August recess. So they are intending to work on this when they return. But again, every single vote counts in the U.S. Senate right now. And a lot of focus has been on Senator Manchin, if he's going to vote for something or if he's not going to vote for something. But really, Democrats also have to corral all of their caucus, making sure that they are supporting all the votes that the caucus wants. Because if they don't, then these things will fail. You also have Republicans, too, saying, yes, we're saying there was a bipartisan deal made, but if some things are in there that we did not agree to and that Democrats want to push into there, like the human infrastructure aspects that the Biden White House wants to see voted on, Republicans may not support those either. So it's going to be a tough balancing act when they return to D.C. Next week. It's definitely something that is not summed up right now.
Yeah, fragile coalition indeed. Ed, I want to ask you a little bit more about the price tag for all of this, because Republicans say that these massive Democratic spending proposals risk raising the national debt. But an interesting headline from Fox Business, of all places, highlights a study suggesting that President Biden's latest budget could actually reduce the nation's debt. What more can you tell us about this? Yeah, but it wouldn't do so for like 3 decades. Look, this is a nonpartisan group at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School that takes budget proposals and tries to figure out the GDP growth and the potential hit on the public debt. This essentially determines that if taken as written, the $6 trillion budget plan, and this is the president's official fiscal 22 budget plan, it would essentially shrink the GDP by 2050, but then eventually actually cut into the public debt, again, by about 5 points over 30 years. And that's because some of these child tax credits, for example, that are so popular that some Democrats are pushing to make permanent would expire after 5 years. You got to remember, though, budget proposals are political documents and ultimately great academic and economist fodder. Probably makes more sense eventually to take the actual past legislation and then try to forecast exactly how it might go. But, you know, potential concerns about federal overreach, about too much federal spending, certainly a critical and a central argument that Republicans continue to make. Also the concern that there might be some tax increases tied to this, which is why the bipartisan plan emerged with no corporate tax increase, which again, to your point in discussing with Rhonda, is going to be an issue with some Democrats who would like to see tax increases tied to this. But ultimately, these are primarily academic and political arguments and exercises until we see what the final bill is. And that, of course, is still subject to great debate that is set to begin again next week when they get back. And Anita, there are a lot of other items on the president's agenda and for Congress when they return, and one of those is police reform. As we mentioned, President Biden and Vice President Harris met with civil rights leaders to discuss police reform on Thursday. This comes in the middle of an uptick in crime nationally. And I want to point to an interesting poll from USA Today Ipsos that showed that 70% of Americans want bigger police budgets and 77% want more police officers on the streets. But at the same time, only 1 in 5 believe that police treat people equally. So how is the administration kind of dealing with all these dynamics, and what exactly are they proposing?
Yeah, well, they're meeting with these civil rights organizations both about police reform, as you mentioned, but also voting rights, the thing that we were talking about before. These civil rights leaders are, as I mentioned before, want the administration to make some of these other things the priority and not infrastructure. So they're looking at a couple different things. Obviously, again, it seems like we keep saying this, Congress is stuck on some of this legislation and they haven't been able to get it passed. That is something that the White House is talking to them about. White House advisors are talking to members of Congress and their staffs pretty much every day about this police reform bill that is not getting anywhere. There are a lot of sticking points, but one of them is qualified immunity, this idea whether police officers and police departments can be sued. That has been a longstanding issue. But they're also looking at other things. You've seen the president talk about, just as this poll mentioned, that he wants more funding to go to police departments. If you'll remember, this was an issue during the campaign, and I'm sure it will be again, about whether Democrats want to, quote, defund the police or not. President Biden is leaning into this. He's saying, look, I never wanted to defund the police. I never said that. What I'm saying now is that we need to have more funding, and he is proposing different ways to do that. So he wants to do that. He's saying, let's look at the crime that's happening across the country. And this is one of the issues that we need to deal with. He is not going to hear from some of the members of his own party are not going to be happy with this, but it is what he has decided to do, and in part, I think, because it does combat what Republicans are saying. Republicans plan to use an argument in the midterms, and they already are, that Democrats are soft on crime. It's something they've always used, and they used in 2020. So I think in some respects, this is a way to push back on that notion.
Yeah, and interesting, with those midterms fast approaching, that means the window for getting a lot of these items accomplished is ever shrinking. Ed O'Keefe, Anita Kumar, and Rhonda Colvin, thank you all so much for being here.